Today, I want to talk about a very fun deck to use that's been seeing some really good success lately, and that's the Exeggutor deck. This deck is very similar to the Celebi deck, which also runs Exeggutor and Exeggutor EX. This version, however, focuses more on being able to get Exeggutor out and running in the early game, and having Celebi and Mew as counters for the late game, which is when Exeggutor EX kinda falls off a bit. Now, the pros of this deck is that it can deal heavy damage early on. Exeggutor EX being a stage 1 Pokemon that deals 80 damage on 1 energy is really strong. Also, having 160 HP makes it an early game tank. Having Celebi and Mew on your bench makes it so you have a backup plan for the late game, as you don't have to waste many energies on Exeggutor since it can attack with only 1. This gives you the ability to set up Celebi or Mew as you deal out damage with your Exeggutor EX. Now, the non-EX Exeggutor is also an amazing card for when you're going up against decks like Mewtwo, Gyarados, opposing Celebis, and even Charizard, as Exeggutor will deal more damage based on how many energies your opponent has, so it's a really good counterpick to those decks. The cons, however, is that Exeggutor and Celebi rely heavily on coin flips, which can make or break a game. And despite this deck being super strong in the early game, it does fall off a bit in the later game, as other decks can deal more damage consistently as they set up. With that said, let's talk about the build. For your items, go with 2 Pokeball to help get your Execute out as early as possible, X-Speed to help assist with retreating, and 2 Potions to keep your Pokemon healthy early on. For your supporters, Professor's Research is a must. 2 Leaf also help it so you can retreat your Exeggutor EX if needed without having to give it any extra energies. Sabrina and Giovanni are always great for any situation, and 2 Ericas make it so your Exeggutor EX is a pain to take down in the early game. As it's already a tanky beast, with all those heals it causes major problems as your opponent is trying to set up. Now for your Pokemon, you'll want to run 2 Execute, 1 regular Exeggutor, mainly as a counter pick, so you don't really need more than 1. You also run 2 Exeggutor EX, as it's your main attacker in the early game, as well as a Celebi EX and a Mew EX. These 2 Pokemon are mainly here for the late game. Celebi is another all-around great attacker, so being able to give it energies while it sits on the bench is a great strategy. As Exeggutor will be dealing all your damage early on, Celebi can just come in and clean up afterwards. And since Celebi is a secondary attacker this time around, you can take time building it, which means that you don't have to run Superior in this build. And then Mew EX is there to help counter decks like Charizard and Mewtwo and other heavy hitters, which again, if you're up against one of those decks, it's easy to set up Mew since you don't have to attack with it early and you don't even need any psychic energies. This deck is phenomenal. While it's very risky due to coin flips, early on if you're able to get lucky, you can easily take down so many targets before they even get a chance to set up. Having a counter to SS tier decks like Mewtwo and Gyarados also make this deck a very solid choice. Celebi and Mew give this deck a lot of flexibility and counters, which help out so you don't have to solely rely on Exeggutor. I think this deck has a very strong presence in the current meta, and it can go toe-to-toe with some of the best decks out there. If you run this deck, let me know what build you use and how you think it fares up against other decks. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the rest of my TCG Pocket content for more guides.